Good afternoon. Welcome to the Tateuchi Democracy Forum of the Japanese American National Museum. My name is Chris Komai. I'm the Public Information Officer here. And I wanted to welcome you to this program, Quakers, Friends of the Japanese American Community. Now, this program is really a partnership between several organizations, including the American Friends Service Committee, Nikkei for Civil Rights and Redress, and UCLA, especially the George and Sakaye Aratani professorship for Japanese American Internment, Redress, and Community Studies at the Asian American Studies Department at UCLA. I would tell you that we may actually run the program not quite in the order in which it is written, but I'm sure you'll be able to stay with it without any problems. Before we get started, I wanted to note that the Japanese American National Museum is in the midst of commemorating its 25th anniversary. It was 25 years ago. The museum was formed in 1985 without a permanent site, without a dollar, but with an idea. And the idea was that the story of the Japanese community in this country is an important story to America. And what happened to it, as you all are aware for having come to this program, that a very important story happened during the war. And it was people like our founding president, who is here, Bruce Kaji, who had the idea that if we didn't create an institution to preserve and share that story with other Americans, we faced the danger that it would be lost forever. I think your presence today tells Bruce that his idea worked and that we have this wonderful institution that he and his fellow founders created for us, so there would be a place for these kinds of programs. So let's all give Bruce a hand for all his stuff. Before I start the program, I wanted to make one mention of something that I'm sure you're all aware of, and that is the passing of UCLA's most famous basketball coach, John Wooden. Now, a lot of you go, well, why are you mentioning John Wooden here at the Japanese American National Museum? In 2000, John Wooden came to speak here, and it was the most well-attended event I think I can remember. It took place in the Aratani Central Hall, and I think we broke every fire law in the world because so many people wanted to come. But he embodied, I think, a certain kind of person that we all admire and we all look up to, because his values were so clear. And he is, or he was, what I think we in the Japanese community would call a sensei. He was a teacher. And we all learned of it. In our community, our Japanese American community, learned as much from John Wooden as anyone else. I know I personally, when I was playing basketball in our community leagues, everybody tried to run the same kind of, whoa. This is a good sign. This is a good sign because it means that the video that they want to play will work. Anyway, I just wanted to remark, since John Wooden came in 2000 and he did spend some time with us, and I personally got to meet him, that it is certainly an event worth of noting that he has passed away, because today's event very much is about people who follow their consciences, people who care about what's right and wrong. And what we are going to hear today in this program are people who, in the time of the most dire situations, are willing to stand up for what's right. So that's why we are at the Japanese American National Museum delighted to host this program here on the idea of the American Friends Service Committee, and anyone who stands up at that moment and says, this is wrong and you ought to know what's right. The war is a good example of that, and I think that's a subject worthy of our time today. So to begin the program, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. Joe Franko is the former regional director of the American Friends Service Committee of the Pacific Southwest Regional Office. He is also now a professor at Mount St. Antonio College in Walnut in mathematics and computer science. He is a person who is staying up to date because I notice he's prepared his speech on an iPad. So ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Joe Franko.
Think Steve Jobs. I wanted to start off today by saying how wonderful it is to see so many old friends here. And I want to introduce Shan Creighton. Shan, would you stand up for a minute? She's the current regional director in the Pacific Southwest region. And I don't think Betsy or Ziba are here, but I'll, are they? Where are you, Betsy? There she is. Okay. Betsy is the director of our development department in Philadelphia, and with her is Ziba, who is, where's Ziba? Where are you? There she is. Okay. And Ziba's out of the San Francisco office of development. In every time and in every place, there have been people who have stood out. People of every culture, of every nationality, people who have stood on principles, who have said, this I believe. This is what I know to be true for me. One of the wonderful, absolutely wonderful things about working for the American Friends Service Committee is that you get to work with a whole bunch of people who are not shy about standing out. One of my heroes, I was so pleased to be asked to talk today, because one of my heroes was Gordon Hirabayashi. And it is a great honor for me to be here with his nephew Lane. It is, I can't tell you how thrilled I am about that. They gave me 10 minutes to talk. And if you know, you get made a professor if you can talk an hour about nothing. And you get made a distinguished professor if you can talk 3 hours about something. So fitting down the American Friends Service Committee's involvement with Americans of Japanese ancestry is really difficult. So what I decided to do was to focus on 1 month, May 1942. And I want to thank Claire Gorfinkel, who's back there, who got me some archival material to read to you about what happened in that month, May 1942. Now, in February, you probably know that the first order came out for putting a, I forgot now, I'm nervous. You can't be out after 8 o'clock at night. Curfew, thank you. So, a curfew, that came out in February. Many Japanese people, I was moved by some accounts of Japanese Americans who had packed some bags and left them by the door because they saw the writing on the wall. Many didn't, but some did. The American Friends Service Committee had a history with Eleanor Roosevelt. She liked the American Service Committee a lot, and when there was a problem in West Virginia with the miners, she got the AFSC involved. She understood our work at feeding children in the First World War, which was really unpopular work, feeding German children. Many felt that we were consorting with the enemy by feeding German children. But she was a great friend of the AFSC. And so I think this came from her. This is a letter dated May 5th, 1942, from Milton Eisenhower to Clarence Pickett, who was the director of the American Friends Service Committee. He starts off and he says, the American Friends Service Committee can make a significant contribution to the program of the War Relocation Authority. Many eminent educators have urged that university students in prohibited zone be permitted to transfer to Midwestern colleges and universities where they may consider continue their education. Certainly I agree that this would be desirable. It's not feasible for the WRA to undertake such a university program for American citizen Japanese, but this in no way detracts from the desirability of such an accomplishment. Consequently, I should like to ask that you establish a committee which would aid you in formulating a set of policies and a program. So that was from Milton Eisenhower to Clarence Pickett. Like everything, there's more to that letter I'm excerpting here. Like everything in the AFSC committee, AFSC and Quakers, we formed a committee. And the committee was formed to decide whether the AFSC would take this work on. Before that, a few weeks before that, Bob Young, who lived in Pasadena, who was a Quaker who lived in Pasadena, wrote the Henry Stetson, the War Department person, and about how Quakers were upset with the order to relocate. Stinson wrote him back. He said, "We have made every effort to handle this thorny problem with the utmost care and humanity. And as a matter of fact, it has been very ably so handled by General DeWitt. The conduct of General DeWitt and of the officers working under him has won the approval of all good American citizens in that neighborhood. And the evacuees themselves have expressed their appreciation of the consideration and care shown to them." And now I'd like to read General DeWitt. "The Japanese race is an enemy race, and while many second and third generation Japanese born on American soil, possessed of American citizenship, have become Americanized, the racial strains are undiluted. The very fact that no sabotage has taken place to date is a disturbing and confirming indication that such action will be taken." So the fact that you didn't do anything meant that you were going to do something. The Los Angeles Times, no paragon of virtue, said, "A viper is nonetheless a viper whenever the egg is hatched," wherever the egg is hatched. So now I move to May 16th. "Dear Mr. Eisenhower," this is from Mr. Pickett. "Dear Mr. Eisenhower, we have received your letter of May 5th, in which you lay before us the American Friends Service Committee a request that it should use its facilities in relocating college and university students from the West Coast to inland institutions, that they may be enabled to continue their college career. I am authorized to inform you that our organization accepts the responsibility which you have suggested we assume. However, all of us were deeply humiliated that such a relocation problem has seemed to be inescapable, and especially that American citizens are being detained. Having expressed our humiliation as American citizens, we wish to offer our service in any way we can to assist them in the alleviation of the distress caused to them and to prepare them for useful membership in American society." Well, the American Friends Service Committee sometimes gets itself in trouble with Quakers. The American Friends Service Committee is a prophetic organization. And so we have a struggle as many other prophetic organizations have, between trying to reconcile the reconciling aspect of Quakers with the prophetic aspect of Quakers. So a few days later, Clarence Pickett wrote to American Friends meetings. The American Friends Service Committee has been requested by the War Relocation Authority to take primary responsibility for the relocation of Japanese students from prescribed areas on the West Coast. After due deliberation, this responsibility has been accepted. It seems appropriate, however, that in undertaking this service, a statement should be made to our own membership concerning the entire evacuation. It would be untrue and a matter of regret if the decision of the Service Committee were understood by friends and others to mean that we accepted the evacuation as a matter of regret. It has come to us with deep humiliation and profound concern that events have revealed in the bloodstream of our American life a poison which has caused this disease of hatred. Whether it be greed or race prejudice or war hysteria, it is equally dangerous. It blinds the patient to the long-established values so dearly bought and which we had thought are represented in American citizenship. Our boast of fair play and our emphasis on the value of the individual. One of the things that made the American Service Committee unique at that time was our outspoken opposition to the evacuation. There were many religious groups who, once the camps were started, took to making, or trying to make as clearly as they could, as well as they could, life more bearable in the camps. But the American Friends Service Committee is the only religious institution at the time that spoke out publicly against the internment. That letter of Clarence Pickett's was written on May 16th. I have a newspaper article here dated May 16th. Headed, Gordon Hirabayashi challenges Japanese American exclusion orders on May 16th. On May 16th, Gordon Hirabayashi, University of Washington senior, Quaker, and conscientious objector, drove with his attorney to the Seattle FBI office and challenged the Army's exclusion orders from the West Coast. Orders which apply to all Japanese Americans and to their immigrant elders. To comply with these orders, which he believes are based upon racial prejudice and represent a violation of the United States Constitution and the rights of citizens, this principled American-born citizen of Japanese descent writes as part of his 4-page statement, I would be giving helpless consent to the denial of practicality of all the things which give me an incentive to live. Hirabayashi was subsequently charged with disobeying Public Order 503, which provided criminal penalties for violations of the exclusion orders and for failure to comply with the Army's curfew order. After refusal to post bail, which would have required that he join the Seattle Japanese community, now being held en masse at the Puyallup Assembly Center, Hirabayashi was placed in the King County Jail to await trial. And one of the things I can tell you, one of the reasons he's my hero is because I've spent time in the Kings County Jail. So my staff used to have this mug shot of me that was taken the day I was admitted to the Kings County Jail for a principled stand in Seattle. On October 20th, the U.S. District Court in Seattle found him guilty on both counts, leading to a 90-day jail sentence. It was appealed, and it was argued in May 1943, and the appeal was denied, and he was ordered to report. Now, another story about Gordon that warms my heart as a Quaker is that he showed up in Arizona at the detention center, and they didn't have any paperwork, which meant that he could leave. But Gordon was a true Quaker at heart. He said, why don't I go out and have some dinner and you could look for the paperwork? Now that is a fundamental principle of Quakerism, that one takes responsibilities for one's stand, that you can't avoid the consequences of your stand. And so one of the reasons Gordon is my hero is that he understood that at a very deep level, and that was probably given to him by his parents. I learned that, this is a professor here, that his parents had belonged to a religious movement in Japan called Mokyokai, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. It was a home church movement. And one of the astonishing things to me was the connection between them and Quakers. They had no ministers. They had no creed. These are all things we share. They had no churches. They met in homes. Their meetings were called, as ours are, meetings. So by the time they came to this country, the ground was set by his parents for him to begin to take a principled stand. Now that doesn't mean, anybody who's a parent in the room knows, that doesn't mean you sit easy with that. Okay? Sometimes you just say, okay, and you go along with it. His parents had a little trouble with it at first, but then they came around to see the stand he took. I want to read to you some other things. There were 2,500 students helped by the American Friends Service Committee and Quakers in the U.S. Here are some statistics. Male students were in the majority with 67%, which I thought was pretty good for the time. 10% of the total desire graduate studies, 67% of the continuance of undergraduate work, 23% are high school graduates wishing to enter college, 69% of these students are Protestant, 17% Buddhist, 3% Catholic, while 11% claim no affiliation. 25% wish to study some form of health care, nursing, dentistry, pharmacy, optometry. One of the incredible experiences of being a director of the AFSC is that you get to meet lots of people. I remember stories by Bob and Helen Hayes, who were Quakers down in Whittier, and they talked about spiriting across the border a young interracial couple because at the time they couldn't be married in California. I also remember stories about, let me get some names here. Laura Shibuya, who worked for the American Service Committee from 1944 to 1949. And you may know that not only did we work with students, we also helped in relocation back to the LA area. We had a hostelry for those folks who had no place to come back home to. Many Quakers opened their doors up at the time. Many Quakers, before the relocation, made arrangements with Japanese Americans to buy their businesses with the agreement to sell their businesses back to them when they returned. Many Quakers made loans so that Japanese Americans who returned could start again. There's a wonderful story about a strawberry farmer back east who was in an internment camp, who was given a loan of $10,000 to restart a farm back there after the internment. Herbert Nicholson was another Quaker in the area. Before the war, he had spent a lot of time in Japan, could speak Japanese. After the war, he and a lot of other people in Pasadena spent time at Manzanar, trying to make conditions there easier, if you could make conditions there any easier. I want to read to you a letter. Am I going over time here? Should I? 2 minutes? Okay, 2 minutes. I told you, you give a professor 10 minutes, he takes an hour. This is a letter to Haverford College, and they say, we have just received all the necessary documents for Augustus Tanaka, who is going to Haverford College. The only thing lacking is community approval, and I'm hoping you can obtain this. Gus is 18 years old, formerly lived in Portland, has worked as a grocery clerk and farm laborer. He was a student at Reed College. He is now at the North Portland Assembly Center, but will be soon moved to a relocation center. And then there's some talk about how much money he has, and if that isn't enough, his parents could contribute more. If he could have a sponsor in Haverford, this is in Pennsylvania, a sponsor in Haverford, either at the college or in the new community, that would be all the WRA would require. And then there's some talk about community approval, should take the form of a statement from some qualified law enforcement official, such as the chief of police, sheriff, commissioner, etc., to the effect that public sentiment in your community is not such as to take serious exception to the presence of Tanaka at Haverford College. So you get a sense here of how important the AFSC's work was at the time in helping students contribute. Bob Hayes, who I spoke a little bit about before, wrote a book following, he was a sociologist, he wrote a book following up on the effects of the transfer of these 2,500 students to the Midwest. What kind of effects did it have on them? What kind of effects did it have on their communities when they returned? So I want to thank you all for this opportunity to say hello again and to welcome in the future more contact between the Japanese American community and the American Friends Service Committee. Thank you so much. You wanted me to introduce me? I do want to say something. Okay? Sorry about that. Maybe I do. Oh, yeah, here we go. I wanted to say something about, you can read the brochure, you can hear everything about Lane's curriculum vitae in the brochure, but I wanted to share with you some comments from his students, because one of the things that's important to a professor is the view that his students have of him or her. So, one of his students said, he is easily one of the greatest professors I have had. Another student, now I need an iPad to look cool, but this student said, few professors are as cool as this professor. They talked about what a nice guy he is and how laid back he is, and this was the one that moved me. A few times, Professor Hirabayashi made me weep when he was talking about history. I could only hope for such praise.
I only have come in to intervene really quickly. I know that there's a few people who are standing. There are some seats. So at this moment, we will take a little bit of a break, enough from the program. I'm going to stall a little bit, so people who want to move down, please take advantage of the seats. Don't stand or don't sit on the floor. I mean, that's fine. We're delighted that the place is almost completely full. And but we just, yeah, but please take this opportunity right now before Professor Hirabayashi comes up to find a seats. It'll just take 1 minute to get everybody in position, and then we'll be fine.
Two right there. There's one right here.
Okay.
There's some over there as well. So if you're standing up, please. There's a seat right here. No, she said she could sit down.
Professor Franko was mentioning about the fact that, you know, it had been illegal for people of different races to get married. Next week, June 12th, is Loving Day. And that, of course, is the day where the Supreme Court finally outlawed in all 50 states all the miscegenation laws, and it was legal to get married in any of the states, despite, you know, the fact all the customs and against race. We're having a program here on that day, on June 12th, featuring Kip Fulbeck, the artist and photographer, and then Maya Sotero Ng, who is President Obama's half-sister. It's a conversation. Now, in some ways, I'm cruel to tell you this because it's sold out. However, we do have a waiting list, and we may try to do a little spillover on that anyway. But I thought it's appropriate, since we're talking about things like that we are recognizing Loving Day as well, which is next week. So anyway, since we're all seated, we're all ready, then it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Lane Hirabayashi.
Well, good afternoon, and it's really an honor to be here, and I'd like to thank everyone who's worked hard to organize this forum. And I'd like to take about 15 or 20 minutes. I'll take my watch off because Joe's absolutely right. 20 minutes. Professor never talks more for less than an hour, but I'll try and keep it at 15 to 20. And just by way of background, since 2009, I've been working on a book manuscript that's about my uncle, Gordon Hirabayashi. And this is maybe the 5th research project that I've worked on with my father, Jim Hirabayashi. So we've been having a lot of fun, basically looking through family photo albums, and I get to hear a lot from him about his growing up and his childhood memories of Gordon and camp and so forth. But essentially, although we are looking through the family photo albums, we are, this new book's going to revolve basically around Gordon's letters from jail. So King County Jail in Seattle, Department of Justice Federal Prison, camp in Tucson or outside of Tucson, Arizona, and McNeil Island. And courtesy of my colleague, can you dim the lights a little bit in the front so maybe this shows up? Courtesy of my colleague, Karen Tay Yamashita, who beat me to the archives in Philly. There are letters like this that are in the archives and that we have in our personal possession. And this one's typed so it's a little clearer, to Homer Morris from Gordon. So we're looking through these things, and Gordon, of course, was a young man at this juncture, as Joe pointed out. He's about 24 and a senior at University of Washington when he's arrested, right? So in doing the sorting and analysis of his letters, because we've really just started this project, we've been trying to get at Gordon's roots and influences. And again, as Joe has already pointed out, these include things like, you know, my Nisei grandparents and the extended Hirabayashi family and relatives that were also very influential. Mokyokai, or this Japanese non-church Christianity. The very interesting area south of Seattle, Kent Thomas, where Gordon and the kids, the children grew up. And very much the U.S. institutions that he was exposed to, like the educational system, Protestant church, and the Boy Scouts. And I think I'm right on this, that Gordon was either was or was close to being an Eagle Scout, which is something I didn't really know about. When Gordon enrolled at the University of Washington, he was unfortunately exposed to discrimination in that context. But at the same time, he found fellowship with organizations like the YMCA and, of course, the Religious Society of Friends, which is the formal name of the Quakers or Friends. So he was really quite a young man when this whole thing happens, and I kind of have to remind myself that he's less than half my age as all this kind of thing comes down, right? So I'd like to give an overview that focuses on the influence that the Quakers had on Gordon from the early 1940s through the end of the war. And what was really clear is that the Quakers were an inspiration to and for Gordon throughout the difficult years of the 1940s. And so what was this all about? Essentially, service is an undeniable commitment, and really it's a religious, it's a spiritual kind of service. I'm not a Quaker myself, so maybe if people have questions to ask about this, Joe and Anthony and others can best respond. But as I understand it, as part of their spiritual and religious observances, the Quakers have a distinguished record of humane efforts and contributions, especially on the part of their service arm, the American Friends Service Committee, or AFSC, then and now. So as a student, Gordon was inspired by this tradition, and he decided to become a Quaker while he was still an undergraduate student at University of Washington. And when the war broke out, Gordon dropped out of school, basically, because everyone knew that the roundup was going to come down. So he dropped out and started working for the American Friends Service Committee. And in particular, I didn't have time to write it down, but a very influential figure for him is Professor Floyd Schmo, who was in the biology department at UW. Gordon had kind of been able to have some contact with him. He was a very charismatic, very energetic figure. And this led Gordon into the Quakers and then into service via the AFSC. So based on our preliminary analysis of Gordon's letters, plus the very important Pacific Coast AFSC newsletter, and I hope a lot of you got the bibliography, the one-page bibliography was handed out as you came in because the newsletter is online, right? We've identified Quaker involvement in the following kinds of activities on behalf of Japanese Americans. And I might add parenthetically that when he was out of jail, Gordon did many of these kinds of things with Floyd and with the AFSC in Spokane was where they were working out of. Right after Pearl Harbor, the AFSC representatives helped Nisei, who'd been swept up by the Justice Department, right? So Floyd and others go out to Bismarck, North Dakota, and other places to give comfort and aid to these people that had just been swept up by the FBI. Sometimes the families didn't even know where they'd been taken to. Then as Executive Order 9066 was carried out in 42, the AFSC helped Japanese Americans leave their homes and communities, sometimes with a week's notice, basically. And here from the information bulletin, the Japanese American Relations Committee, which again is online and you can get to it for free, here in LA, the last 50 went out last group went out from LA to Parker Dam, which is basically Arizona, right out to Poston. At the bottom there it says, breakfast and transportation to the station were furnished by FOR and church people. Many friends assisted in this, right? And I think a lot of people remember that, right? It may have been coffee and donuts or whatever, but I mean, they were there to say goodbye and offer help because they went and worked with people in camp. So release from camp was possible as early as 1942 for those Japanese Americans who could demonstrate their loyalty to the U.S. and who could, sustain proof of a job somewhere on the outside out of the excluded military areas, or for college-age students that they were admitted somewhere, many times to Quaker colleges, I might add. And in this kind of context, the American Friends Service Committee helped out in all kinds of different ways. So they worked very much with the WRA Resettlement Office, and I'll show about 30 pictures here because I think it's important to see the tangible evidence of what they did. Here's Robertson Ford of the AFSC. This is in Philly in 45. They're looking at a map. Actually, can't see it so well, but they're looking at a map pinpointing all the JA resettlers in the Philly area, right? So they're on top of this. Here's a bulletin board announcing jobs. But in a lot of the texts, I picked these pictures out because it indicates here that the guy, I think on your left, my pointer's not working, he's employing 500 people at Seabrook Farms in New Jersey, and I'll get to that a little bit later because that's a point of Quaker assistance as well. So, the AFSC is working with a lot of different organizations as well as doing its own activities on behalf of the, Japanese Americans in this terrible situation. So besides providing leads on jobs and information on possible employment, I found it interesting that the Quakers themselves also hired, it seems, a good number of the resettling Japanese Americans. So we have Mary Kobayashi, and I really want to name these people, right? Because these are specific individuals. Mary Kobayashi in 43 out of Poston is working in Washington, D.C. as a housekeeper at the Friends guest house. Here is Masami Yoshida from Hart Mountain, and maybe this is some of your relatives, I don't know. She's secretary to Clarence Pickett. They're in Wallingford, Pennsylvania in 44. He says she's extremely competent, right? Here in the Friends Service Committee office in Philly, there's a Yoshiyuki Kawai, working there with Emily Kiyokawa in the finance department. And then in the secretarial area, people like Toyo Okuda out of Granada, same office. And this is just a shot of a family. It's the Kiraoka family in Moorestown, New Jersey in 44. They're sitting around with some friends, but the young lady with the overalls on your right-hand side, Alice, it says, Kiraoka, is working for the service committee in Philly. And, this is part of the family income. These are folks in Seattle running something called the Eleanor Apartments in 45. And at the bottom, you see that one of their daughters, who's not present in the picture, is working for the American Friends Service Committee in Seattle, right? So these are pictorial evidence from the 40s of a lot of help. The AFSC also set up a whole range of hostels by themselves. They say rooming houses, not hostility, but rooming sites. And these were critically important launching pads, right? Because people came into the area out of camp. It was tough to find housing. The war's on and everything. And so these hostels are very important while individuals and families look for more permanent housing. So here, and these are just things that I've culled. These are all online, by the way. They're all official WRA photographs. This is Cincinnati, Ohio in 43, where this is a group of Japanese American resettlers at the Friends Hostel in Cincinnati, right? This is the actual hostel building itself, the hostel in Cincinnati, and the directors there were Quakers Arthur Brinton of George School, Philadelphia, and his wife Kate. And there he is, Brinton, with a group of Nisei that meet the first Thursday of every month to talk. So this is very important because it's not just a roof over their head, but this is giving Issei a chance to link up, talk about, what's happened to them and recover, right? So this is critical. Oh, by the way, a lot of the photographs I'm going to show you today are taken by Hikaru Carl Iwasaki. He is the last living member, a Japanese American in Nisei. He's the last living member of the, WRA photography team. And I just would like to have him stand up for a second because it's here today. And please, let's give him a round of applause. Thank you for coming out, Carl. So, let me see, where did I go? So I'll show you a number of his shots, but I mean, this, for me, born somewhat after the end of World War II, is a really important record because I like to see things, right? And because Carl went all over the United States in about a 2-year period, as about a 19 or 20-year-old, we have this kind of repository of records to look, because these are all named people, the Quakers and the Jays alike. That's why I'm so excited about these things. Let's look here in Des Moines, Iowa in 44. We're looking at, I'll just give you surnames, Sakamoto, Oji, Yoshida, Kanatani, Chikahisa, which is kind of an unusual name. James Chikahisa was then working as a print shop worker in Des Moines area in Iowa. But I know Chikahisa's from around here, so I was kind of curious if that might be a relative. Here's a George Yoshida from Lindsay, also taken by Carl in Des Moines. Again, Friends Hostel at 2150 Grand Avenue. Family staying there until they can get their thing together, right? Here is Mrs. Elizabeth Wilbur, the wife of the director of the hostel with the Jack Ikemoto family. He's out of San Jose and Hart Mountain. He's looking around for employment as an auto mechanic. There's the Wilbur's daughter, along with Harrison Wakita And then his mom, I imagine Mrs. Ruth Wakita, is working at the hostel as a dietitian, right? And then you can see there, this hostel alone houses 25 to 30 persons. And March 17th, when Carl shot this, there are actually 27 persons of Japanese descent living there, trying to make it back on their feet. This is really a precious photograph for me because it's the Koyasan Buddhist temple right across the street, right? And so we see Mr. Gentaro Miyahara, who's director of, then he turned it into a hostel so people have a place to stay when they came back to LA. And there he is with with the gentleman there is Carl Pomberg of the American Friends Service Committee, Margaret Peterson and Jean Blair, volunteer assistants, right next door. Right? This is a shot of the Kaneda family. It's very detailed captions that are fascinating, so you can really find these people. Here's Mr. Kaneda working, but they're living in quarters facilitated by the Quakers, right? Jumping to San Francisco, I found this shot of Miss Alice Soda, who's working at Holloway Seed Company in San Francisco in 45. But she's staying at the Friends Building on Sutter Street, which interestingly enough, and I think happened on a variety of occasions, was formerly the Japanese-American YWCA. Huh, Valerie? That's a famous building in San Francisco for those of us who are interested in JA history and community empowerment, because the community fought. They paid for that building. And not so long ago, in the 90s, they had to fight to retain control over that particular edifice. So at any rate, some of the sites that the AFSC promoted involved both housing and jobs as well. So I hadn't known this, but Wilbur in the MA thesis that I cite on that one-page bibliography indicates that Seabrook Farms had something to do with Quakers, either the Dearborn packing plant or the Seabrook Farm. So I'm going to have to look into that because I'd never seen that before. But our photographer, Hikaru Carl Iwasaki, went specifically on a mission to New Jersey in 44 and shot, at least 50 shots of Seabrook. So it was kind of like a plantation, a farming setup. This is the housing, but at least it's not a barrack, right? Here's a guy, Satsuki Yasumoto, in the packing thing. He's putting some frozen peas or something in there. Cafeteria style. Note that there were 400 JAs working in this place with an overall population in Seabrook of 500. And they're from all different camps, right? Kodama from Gila, Okino from Colorado River or Poston, Tanaka from Poston, and Shinmoto. They were from all over. Here's Mrs. Asano Hashiba, formerly from Rohr, working lima beans, right? So Quakers were instrumental in setting up and running the Japanese American Student Relocation Council. I won't talk much about that because I know others will. Sometimes these campuses also gave employment to Nisei. So here's Juichi Sato, at Pendle Hill, a Quaker graduate school. There's Anna Cox Britton on the couch to your right, who was formerly the Dean of Women's Studies at Mills. She's running this place with her husband. And here is Mrs. Hasagawa, who's teaching Nihongo, also at Pendle Hill. And it says her husband does maintenance work around the campus and things like that. Certainly there are pictures that indicate that AFSC helped locate Japanese American children and teenagers in schools when they were released. And again, many times Quaker facilities. This is the Friends School at Media, Pennsylvania in 44, shot by Tom Parker. And two 5-year-old Jerry Nakagawa and 3-year-old Dorothy Yoshita, getting back to school. There's also pictorial evidence that the Quakers sponsored cultural events where the work of Japanese American artists were featured, an effort, no doubt, to promote goodwill, outreach, and so forth. Famous artist Chiura Obata won with this, and this is the Cambridge, I forget what it's called, Cambridge Meeting of Friends, perhaps. Still there when I looked it up on Google. 43, they sponsored this Chiura Obata 1, and this very poignant, I think, picture of Bunny by someone named Frank Taeda that I've never heard of. I'll have to ask you later if you have that up in the collection. It's a nice shot. The AFC, and I don't have pictures of everything, but the AFC clearly escorted Japanese Americans back home, especially people going back to the West Coast where they were sometimes shot at or burnt, subject to arson and things like that. Especially in 45, right after the war, Quakers went back with them to make sure that there are witnesses to so that people wouldn't get lynched. And especially important to me is the Quakers sought out placement for elderly Issei and even sought to build special care and nursing homes from them. It's so important to me because it's something that got left behind. But here from the information bulletin of the Pacific Coast branch of the American Friends Service Committee, they're saying evacuations casualties, and they're reminding everyone in 45, there are old people out there that are sick, they've got health problems, they're infirm. WRA didn't give a damn about those people, right? They gave them the same $25 on the train ride back to where they came from. But I found this very moving because the Quakers are saying, look, there are people with diabetes, they're blind, they're infirm, they can't serve themselves. We got to be thinking about these people, and let's set up something maybe to help these people because social services aren't cutting it, right? So let me go back to Gordon and kind of wrap this up then. Because Gordon's history during this period and the Quaker history during this period are very intertwined. But in Gordon's case specifically, the Quakers were key to setting up and running the Gordon Hirabayashi Defense Fund. So Wilbur in his master's thesis that's on that bibliography says, well, Quakers didn't do quite enough to defend Japanese Americans from EO 9066, but I respectfully, and I'm not an expert in Quaker history, but I would respectfully disagree with Wilbur's point there because they're clearly involved in encouraging and funding Gordon. And Gordon actually created some distance in the beginning because he didn't want to get Quakers into trouble, is the essence of it. So the Friends supported Gordon not only in terms of encouraging him to fight, but they supported him in his trials and through different periods of incarceration. And my dad was just telling me that, because I'm looking at some letter of Gordon doing Friends work out in Spokane, and I'm saying, wait a sec, this is 43, he's in jail, isn't he? And my dad said that before they actually convicted the guy, the Quakers put down the money to bail him out, and he started working for the AFSC and with Floyd Schmo in Spokane, because that's where this trial was going down. And, Gordon was involved with Floyd in a whole range of aid and resettlement tasks. Like one of the things that Gordon did, because the letters are coming in from all over, was apparently he'd pick up people's cars in Seattle and drive them out to Minidoka or wherever, people were getting released and they wanted their jalebi back. So in 1945, I don't know how many people know about this, but the American Friends Service Committee helped Gordon and our family set up a special nursing home in Seattle for care of Issei after the war. And this is where I was born. I was born in King County Hospital, but essentially my first memories in my first 5 years, apart from a trip to Japan for a year, while my dad did some research, were in that nursing home. So that's what I remember at about age 3. I just remember being in this big building with all these Issei that were older. And some gave me candies and spoiled me, and others chased me around with their cane. But it was many years later that I realized, these people were the resettlers that was it. They were not going to, they couldn't try again. It was, you have to remember that I think the average age of Issei when they went into camp was 60. So by the end of the war, these guys are not going to, okay. So in sum, Gordon and the Hirabayashi families were very much the beneficiaries of Quaker and AFSC support throughout the 1940s. And here I would also add to Wilbur by saying we benefited from organizations that were essentially coalitions. So you don't see it at first, but in fact many of these coalitions of church organizations were set up by or they ran with the direct involvement of the Friends. So the Hirabayashi family story in itself, I think we can say this with some confidence, a reflection of the religious commitment to service that is an integral part of the religious society of Friends, rich tradition and history. And here it is from 42. They're saying these guys are in trouble, Japanese Americans are in trouble. Where's your conscience? Get out your wallet. These people need some help right now, right? And you can look it up online on the bulletin. This is all on the record. So I'd like to take this occasion to acknowledge that service, and I'm appreciative of the chance to speak here, and to recall the many Japanese Americans who you've seen and I've named who also benefited. And I'd personally like to thank the Quakers and the American Friends Service Committee for their commitment to our family specifically, and then to the Japanese American community generally. And I hope I wrote it down right. Osama Kagade. Thank you.
And just close it. Thank you, Professor Hirabayashi. I neglected to mention that he just came out with his book called Japanese American Resettlement Through the Lens, which features many of the photographs taken by Mr. Iwasaki up there. It is Professor Hirabayashi's sort of relook at those photos and what it really meant to members of our community. I wanted to quickly make a small correction on Joe's presentation. I think he made a reference to Bob and Helen Hayes, and I think he meant Bob and Helen O'Brien, and who by the way, I'm a big fan of Helen Hayes, but and I understand that the O'Brien's daughter is here, Kathy Marin. Is she here? Just wanted to acknowledge your presence here. Before we go on, I wanted really quickly too, I was talking to Bruce Kaji and Hitoshi Samashima and some of our volunteers here, and they all benefited from the work of the American Friends Service Committee. I was wondering how many more are out there. How many of you were able to go to college because of the work of the, could you indicate, raise your hands, everybody who's done that? This is really important for us because I really was curious to see this a direct benefit that happened. So many of these people, Bruce was just telling me that story, how he ended up in Sioux City, Iowa, because of the work of the Quakers. And, you know, it was another start for so many people in our community. And what Professor Hirabayashi was expressing there, for us in our Japanese American community, one of the most important qualities is gratitude. And I can promise you we won't forget. So, to move on, we're going to have our panel, and we're going to hear from some of the people who actually lived through this history and some of the people who want to express some of that gratitude. So, to get started, we're going to ask that Anthony Marsh, a Los Angeles area program director of the American Friends Service Committee, come up. Be seated here. Also, he will be joined by retired Professor Harry Kawahara, formerly of Pasadena City College. If I can get Professor Kawahara to come up. We want to ask Jean Hibino, who's the Executive Secretary of the Nisei Student Relocation Commemorative Fund, to come up. And finally, we're going to ask Esther Takei Nishio, who was the first Japanese-American student to come back to the West Coast. She came to Pasadena back in 1944. The war was still going on. We're so grateful that you're here, and let's all welcome them up to the panel.
I'm Harry Kawahara, and I will help moderate this part of the program along with my colleague, Anthony Marsh, who is on the other end. And Anthony is the LA Area Program Director for AFSC. And Anthony will be conversing with Jean Hibino shortly, but I want to first talk with Esther Takei Nishio. I've known Esther now for a number of years and found her to be a very remarkable woman. And as far as we know, Esther was the first Japanese-American student to return to the West Coast to attend college. So that's a very unique thing, and she was a very historic figure in that respect. She came to Pasadena Junior College in September of 1944, which is well before the end of the Pacific War. And I think she has a very exceptional story to share with you this afternoon. So Esther, I'm glad we're doing that this afternoon with you. It is good to know that we have a forum for you to tell your story and that we can learn more about how the Quakers touched your life back in fall of 1944. So Esther, tell us briefly about your early childhood before World War II. I know you were born in Los Angeles and you were raised on the west side in Venice. But let me quickly say, she looks great. I mean, I have, boy, if I were younger, I'd have a big crush on you, I think. Esther, tell us about your time on the west side in Venice.
Okay. I was born in Venice, just a block, was born in Los Angeles. I understand near the Greyhound Terminal, but I grew up a block from the ocean. My parents were concessionaires, which is quite an unusual occupation for Nisei. They had various concessions on the pier. If you've been to an amusement pier, you might recognize the games like the penny pitch, or where you throw baseballs at milk bottles, or shoot corks at candy bars or cigarette packs, in the olden days. And we had a rabbit race where you pushed the handle and the rabbits would race, and the first one to the top won a prize. And at the end of the pier, we had a fish pond where you used a little fishing pole and caught wooden fishes, and if you turned the tummy over, there was a number, and that indicated what kind of prize you won. Well, I spent a wonderful childhood there. I grew up on the pier, slept behind the counter at night, and I'm sort of a latchkey kid throughout my grammar school and years, because my parents worked late at night and slept late in the morning. And then I went to Venice Venice Junior and Senior High School and took part in all of, extracurricular activities. When we were evacuated, they were kind enough to give me my high school diploma in April when we left for wherever we were going. And that's where we ended up in Santa Anita Assembly Center.
Right, you went to Santa Anita Assembly Center, and then you went to Amachi in Colorado.
Yes, that's right.
Let me ask this question. How is it that you were asked to return to California so early to enroll at Pasadena Junior College, as it was called then? It's now called Pasadena City College. And to come here to be something of a test case. How did that happen?
Well, one of our employees at the pier was James Yoshida, and he was a young man from Japan. But his family had sent him to Pasadena to go to college there to learn the American customs and his English. And he met Mr. Hugh Anderson, who was president of the senior class there. They became very close friends. So when it became evident that the Japanese were going to be evacuated, Mr. Anderson was kind enough to offer his home to store our belongings, and had his friends use our car and our kitchen appliances while we were gone to be returned to us when we returned. And that's how we met Mr. Anderson. He was not a close friend, but sort of a good acquaintance.
He was a Quaker,
Yes,
active Quaker.
he was a friend and a
Friend,
Quaker,
right.
a friend and a
Well,
Quaker.
right.
We didn't realize at the time, but the World War Relocation Authority had asked Mr. Anderson to go to Poston Relocation Center to set up a cooperative store for each of the centers there. So he spent 6 months there alone setting up the stores. Then he called his family to join him there. And so he lived there approximately a year before contracting polio. He was then sent to the White Memorial Hospital in Los Angeles and took several months to recuperate. In summer of 1944, I guess, or in 1944, I guess, Mr. William Carr, who was a prominent real estate broker in Pasadena, his wife, and Mr. Hugh Anderson, who had returned to Pasadena to recover from his polio, founded the Friends of the American Way, which was comprised of Quakers as well as citizens who believed in the principles of democracy and justice for all. They were an amazing group. They were not that many, perhaps 25 or so at the beginning, but they wrote 150 letters offering jobs and housing to returning evacuees and forwarded those letters to Secretary Stimson and Attorney General Biddle in an effort to persuade them to open the West Coast for returning evacuees. They also did many other things, and they offered assistance to the residents of the camps, and Reverend Nicholson was a member of this group, and he drove to Gila many times to deliver necessities that the Japanese families from Pasadena had requested. In fact, this committee kept in touch with every single Japanese family from Pasadena throughout those years to help in any way they could. At one of their meetings, Mr. Carr posed a question to the members: what can we do to urge General Charles Bonesteel, who was the commander of the Western Defense Command that comprised Alaska, Washington, Oregon, California, and Arizona? What can we do to urge him to allow the Japanese to return to the West Coast? At this juncture, Esther Rhodes, who was representing the American Friends Service Committee, voiced her opposition to taking any official action at this time. So the matter was dropped because the Friends of the American Way always acted by unanimous vote. But the matter was not dropped. Hugh Anderson and William Carr decided to go ahead on their own. So they sent off a letter to General Bonesteel, who had replaced the racist General DeWitt, and with a proposal that they find someone from the camp who was willing to come back as a test case and enter the enroll at Pasadena Junior College. And after that person had been successfully integrated into the community, leak out the news that this Japanese American student was in their midst and all was well. So they received an immediate phone call from the general authorizing them to go ahead. So Mr. Anderson, still recuperating from his polio, hopped on a train and rode all the way to Amachi, which is in the southeast corner of Colorado. He proposed this venture to my parents and to myself, and we all thought it was a great idea. And being a 19-year-old, I thought it'd be a wonderful.
I think that's really quite remarkable that you were 19 years old. You were a kid, and you did this. You came
an adult.
with a 3-day trip to Colorado, to Pasadena, right? 3 days.
Yes.
And you came alone.
Yes.
And then you were greeted at the station by students and Hugh
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes, and Reverend Nicholson, you've heard of him.
Yes.
And members of the Friends of the American Way, and the director of the Student Christian Association, and all these wonderful people, and the editor of the school paper, Mr. Carl Palmer. After the wonderful warm welcome, I was whisked to the Pasadena police station, and a mugshot and fingerprints were taken. After that, I was whisked to Eagle Rock, where I met with Dr. Farnham, who is Executive Secretary of the Council of Federated Churches of Los Angeles, and then home to Mr. Anderson's beautiful house.
So you stayed with the Anderson family in Altadena, correct, for
Yes,
a number of months?
Yes, a number of months until my parents came back from Almaty.
Now, I know that Pasadena, well, junior college then and Pasadena City College now, they kind of helped prepare your arrival on the campus. Dr. Harbison, who was then president of the college, spoke to faculty and students about your...
Yes, I didn't realize this when I came back, but on reading Mr. Anderson's autobiography, I learned that Dr. Harbison pulled the faculty and certain members of the student body, and the Board of Education was also pulled, and they all agreed to go ahead with this plan.
Just a quick thing that we don't have a whole lot more time, but the story about the support of the servicemen to support you, your story got out about coming to Pasadena City College, and it appeared in the Stars and Stripes newspaper, the military newspaper,
Yes,
Army newspaper, and they wrote to you about providing their support for you.
This is pretty amazing.
That is amazing.
They had several school board meetings, and that's when all these protests erupted. And most of the loudest voices were from women whose sons or husbands were serving overseas, especially in the South Pacific, and the American Legion, veterans of the foreign wars, and various civic groups, Ban the Japs Committee. They all, wanted me out of there. And I guess the news got out in the papers and then eventually into these Stars and Stripes. But the servicemen, the wonderful servicemen that were fighting for our, country, would send these marvelous letters voicing their support for, supporting my right to be where I was, to attend the college of my choice, to live where I desired to live because I was an American citizen, and they were fighting for the rights of all American citizens. And when the American Legion first heard about my return, they voiced their disapproval. But eventually, after all these letters came in from these men overseas, they changed their attitude. And when the Glendale Post of the American Legion announced that they were planning to march on the Board of Education meeting to protest, they were turned away by the Pasadena group.
I guess we need to move along, but we will have a little question and answer period soon. But Esther, you are a real pioneer and a real historic figure, so we thank you for the courage you demonstrated with many in the face of so many uncertainties of being the first Japanese American to return to the West Coast. But I just wanted to note, it's noteworthy in your program, it talks about General Richard Hartwell Bone Steele, who was the head of the Western Defense Command. He's totally different from General John L. DeWitt, thank God for that. But he stated that the success of Esther's return to Pasadena expedited his decision to rescind the executive order, exclusion order, and allow Japanese Americans to return to the West Coast. So that was a very historic event. And you played, Esther, a very pivotal role in that happening. Of course, we want to thank the Quakers and Hugh Anderson in particular for the roles they played. And amid all that kind of the nastiness and negativity in our society today, for me, it's very uplifting to know there are people like the Quakers, just good, decent, humane people, and I'm sure you had that experience yourself. So, thank you again, Esther, for your contribution.
I'd just like to say that the Friends of the American Way and the Friends and the American Friends Service Committee did such a wonderful service to the Japanese and the Japanese American community and we owe them so much. And what Mr. Carr, Mr. William Carr, and Mr. Hugh Anderson did for us will never be forgotten. They were the unsung heroes, and I'd like to express my deep appreciation and gratitude to all of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry, and thank you, Esther. Again, my name is Anthony Marsh, and I'm the Los Angeles Area Program Director for the American and Friends Service Committee. It has been a distinct honor and pleasure to work on the planning of this event and to work with people like the Nikkei for Civil Rights and Redress, as well as the Japanese American National Museum. It's been especially rewarding because I received phone calls from various people who've been assisted by the Quakers who would share their stories with me, and some of those people are here in this audience, and one in particular, her name is Chiyo Hiraoko, and her daughter, Shelley Kurata, brought her down from Fresno, and she made this trip, and she, she's 88 years old, so she took, oh, she's right here, Chiyo, raise your hand. It's really fitting to acknowledge her because she was actually assisted by the Nisei Student Relocation Commemorative Fund, and Jean is the executive secretary, whom I'll introduce very shortly. I do want to just acknowledge a few people, for instance, the Quakers who are here today to commemorate this warm relationship that the American Friends Service Committee and the Quakers had with the Japanese American community. And I certainly want to let you know that outside, as you'll hear more, we have a commemorative journal that we're selling, which documents a lot of the stories that you've heard today. And we modified the format of this event tonight, or today, in order to allow some of you who have reflections to share some of your stories and some of your thoughts. So after this panel, Kathy Masaoka of the Nisei Civil Rights and Redress will be walking with a microphone. So if you have any thoughts, I'd ask you to collect them now, and we'll leave time for that. So again, I want to introduce Jean Hibino. I just met Jean, and it's very funny because the first thing she told me was that she's from Boston. And then she said, I'm a Boston fan. I'm a Celtics fan. And so we didn't get off to a very good start, but we're still friends. And her only request is that you don't throw any trash or any paper at me. She's executive secretary of the Nisei Student Relocation Commemorative Fund. It was founded under a different name, and she'll tell you the history of that. But Jean has a very impressive history. She grew up in Portland, Connecticut. She's from the Bay Area. She graduated from UC Berkeley. She spent about 17 years in the Bay Area. She completed a master's degree, thesis, and on the covers of the Japanese American Internment. She is also a Civil Liberties Public Education Fund National Fellow. And she came 2,000 miles away from home to come down here. And I just want to say thank you, Jean, for making the trip.
Welcome. I wanted to say thank you, first of all, for allowing me and the scholarship fund that I represent today to come here and speak, and also for being very generous for not yelling at me because I'm from the East Coast. But I'm from the East Coast because my parents were in camp in Topaz. They're from the Bay Area. And when they got out of camp, they went back east, and that's how I ended up back east. So I am a New England Sansei. The organization that we saw in the pictures today, they were talking about the Quakers were starting, were asked to help, Clarence Pickett was asked to help to form a group to get the Japanese college students out of the camps. The name of that organization is the National Japanese American Student Relocation Council. And there was a couple of references when you saw the pictures in there about the council. And I'm here today, I guess my part is the pay it forward part. My parents and my uncles were all helped out of the camp to go to college by this Student Relocation Council, which was led by the Quakers. And my mom was a senior at Berkeley. Oh yeah, and the other thing is we're also San Francisco Bay Area biased, so I'm sorry about that too. my mom was a senior at Cal when evacuation came, and she and her family went to Topaz. My dad had just finished Berkeley, and he got out of Topaz in about 9 months to go to the University of Texas. They allowed him to go, and my mom went to Boston University and to finish her last semester in college. And I guess right after my mom finished, she got a job at the Philadelphia office of the National Japanese American Student Relocation Council, which was the office of the Friends. And Mrs. Hiroka was also there. And I think people know now Takasugi, who just passed away last year. He was also working at the Philadelphia office. And one of the things, just as a history thing, you were the first to come back to the West Coast, but the first to leave the camp was Harvey Itano, that people also know just passed away last month. He went out on July 4th, 1942. They picked that day specifically because it was Independence Day. And if you Google Harvey Itano and Tom Bodine was a Quaker who was working as a field director for the National Japanese American Student Relocation Council. And he was given the call to go. If you Google the story, you can read it. It's a really wonderful story. Tom Bodine was recounting how he was given the call to rush up to Tule Lake to get Harvey Itano out and on a train in Klamath Falls to get to St. Louis University to become that first student out of the camps. And it's a really good story. So I would recommend you looking that up. And forward 40 years to my parents, who by this time had stayed in New England. After my mom finished school, my dad got out of Texas. He followed her to Boston, and they got married in Cambridge. And they stayed in New England. My dad had always said, well, he didn't really want his children to have to grow up in California and face the racism that they were subjected to, so we ended up in the East Coast. And they, at about the 1970s, there was kind of the JCL started this movement to do for Nisei retirement. And there were different retirement conferences all over the country. And my mom went to one in San Francisco, and she was charged with coming back to New England and trying to start a Nisei retirement group. And this was in the 70s. And so she just started looking for other Nisei who lived in New England to hang out with. And they became, friends and socialized people from New Hampshire and Massachusetts and Connecticut and Rhode Island. And then one day they were all sitting around talking, and they discovered that they all were in the camps, and they all had moved back to New England, got out of the camps to go to college outside of the West Coast, moved to New England, and stayed there. And throughout the 70s, they were doing different parties and social things, and one day they said, let's do something more serious. Let us pay back, and they all knew that there existed the Quakers who helped them out of the camps, and the Student Relocation Council. And they said, well, let's do something to honor them and to pay tribute to this group of people who helped us in our time of need. And in 1980, they started a scholarship fund. And our scholarship fund is called the Nisei Student Relocation Commemorative Fund. And they took it from the name of that National Japanese American Student Relocation Council. And we formed officially in 1980, and 1982 was the year that we first gave our monetary award. And we decided to give it to the American Friends Service Committee. The intent was to give to students, of course, but the first year they only had $2,000, and they said, well, let's give it to the Friends in honor and in tribute for what they did for us during the war. And I believe it's even in our bylaws of the scholarship fund that if we ever decide to fold, all the money that we have is going to go to the Friends because of what they had done. And it was definitely a tribute as well as to pay it forward to do something for others who, as they were helped during the war as well. And so from that initial 2000, this year was our 30th anniversary, and we gave our awards in Washington, D.C. We gave out $50,000 in scholarships. So we just feel it's just a totally fitting tribute to the American Friends and for people who are all justice-minded, fair-minded individuals who came forward during the war. And the uniqueness about our scholarship fund is that we give to Southeast Asians, and only Southeast Asians. And there are 3 countries that were affected by the Vietnam War: Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. And when the Nisei started the fund in 1980, they said that all in the news there were reports about the boat people who were fleeing Vietnam, and they felt that in some ways the experiences of the Vietnamese refugees reminded them of their own wartime experiences, in the sense that they were young, their educations were disrupted, they were uncertain about their futures, they were separated from their families, and so they chose to do that, and we still give to Southeast Asians. And we've given out over the years, the 30 years, about 600 scholarships, and it's been a very, very rewarding experience. There are 12 of us on the board. We're all volunteer. None of us get paid. Half of us are Nisei, which means that they're at least 85 years and older. And our board meetings are very interesting because we have to shout a lot because people are kind of hard of hearing, and so we're like just trying to get our points across. But it's been a real honor for me to work on this board. These guys have an awful lot of energy, and the other half of us are Sansei, and they're always talking about what the Friends have done for them during the war, and they make it a point during each award ceremony that we give every year in a different city all over the country. We have a DVD, and it's very clear when we show it to the kids that 2 things. One was the internment, and number 2, you pay back. You give back, and in a way to help people, who are not as fortunate as you are. And I guess there's a Japanese concept that it's called ongaishi, right? It's to repay a kindness once done to you. So, and that is our abiding principle that we use, and it was because of that organization that helped my folks and their generation during the war. Oh, and this is a pamphlet that was put together by this National Japanese American Student Relocation Council. It was one of their, it's like a brochure that they put out during the war. And actually, when you read it, it does say Esther's name is in this pamphlet. I just realized that it says it was one of the individual permits that Esther Takei, the first civilian student to return, reached Pasadena Junior College in September. And you were in here. And I thought that was kind of interesting. The council put together a pamphlet to show to the government of the good work they were doing during the war. And by 1944, the third year of its existence, they had approximately 4,500 applications for the Nisei College kids who were trying to get out of camp. But anyway, you can ask me questions.
So, I believe at this point we're wrapping up the program. What we're going to do is we're going to invite Lane and also Joe to come up here, and we'll have them sit in my place and also Harry's, and leave the floor open for questions. But also Kathy Masaoka of the Nikkei for Civil Rights and Redress will have a microphone, or someone from JANM, and we're going to allow those in the audience to share any experiences they had being assisted by the Quakers or the American Friends Service Committee. So it's both the comment section and also an opportunity to ask questions, and Kathy will give you some instructions about that.
Right. We do have a reception following this, and we know that everyone would like to go there. We'd like everyone. It's a very nice reception, but we didn't want to miss the opportunity to have where all people that are here today, and some maybe had experiences with the Friends, to be able to share that. So we wanted to take only about maybe 10 minutes, and there's also questions, so that's kind of a lot to try to do in 10 minutes. But if there are people that did have experience with their Friends and just could tell us their name and what their experience was being helped by the Friends, and maybe keep it under a minute. Thank you.
I'm Miriam Bruff Covington. My dad was doctor in Whittier, and they worked particularly with the people who had to get off Terminal Island. And they had to get off so fast, they took the men away immediately, and the women were left, and people were going in and, just raiding things. Dad helped find storage for things, and they came to Norwalk, and every night after his business as a doctor in Whittier, he would go out and give health care to there were actually two, one in Norwalk and one that was sort of like out in East Whittier, I'm not quite sure. And then when people were put in the racetrack, my dad had 5 kids. We'd load us all in the car. We'd go on Sundays to visit the people in the racetrack who were in the horse stalls. And then he had to find a place for some woman who had tuberculosis, and it was hard to find somebody who would take him. He finally arranged for her, and we would go one Sunday to visit her and the next Sunday to see her family so that she had some connection. I remember as a child what a profound thing that was.
Thank you. So is there anyone else that would like to share their experience?
Hello, I'm speaking for my mother, Tomiya Sakita. We were at Tule Lake, and after the war, there was 4 of us, 2 sisters and me and my brother. And I don't know how my mother got us from Tule Lake to Lomita, but I know it was the Quakers that helped us. And from Lomita, we went to Burbank in the trailer camps. And from there, we went to the Shonyen, or the orphanage. And I have this book. It's called Treasures in Earthen Vessels. And he mentioned the name Nicholson. And no, I know you can't see this, but it's written right here with the signature of Nicholson. And I don't know the date because there was no date on here, but I'm sure it was somewhere in the 1950s. So I want to thank the Nicholson and his family and all of the Quakers that have helped my mother. So thank you very much.
My name's Kunio Tsuneyoshi, and I was 7 years old in Harmon, Wyoming during World War II, and Christmas of 43, I think. I was 7 years old, and we had a Christmas program, and Santa Claus was giving out gifts, and I got a little gift too, but I wasn't going to go up to see Santa Claus to get it because I was really scared. First time I saw Santa Claus, a big red dressed person, suited person, and I was afraid to go up. But I did get this gift. I still kept the book. This is the original book I got. It's called, well, I'll tell you, it's The Little Engine That Could. And this was given to me by the Quakers. There was a little slip of paper in here, and I think it was maybe pasted on there, and it said, if you'd like to thank the person who sent you this gift, write to, I think it said Quakers, and I think the address is New York City. And I never did write that thank you letter, so a little late now, but I'd like to thank you very much for this.
Is there anyone else that would like to share something? Oh, okay. I was going to go over here first.
My uncle, Masamori Kojima, he went to Haverford, and he's passed away, but he kept a lot of correspondence. And I have one of I think the first letter from the Friends to the young people at Santa Anita. It's dated June 1942. And when I first read about how they supported all the young people and encouraged them to keep reading about the outside world, to try to prevent cliques from forming in the camps, and it's just a marvelous thing. And it was a copy because they said that they sent mimeographed copies to all of the young people, and I think there were more than this first letter, but it's the only one I have. And so we understood it wasn't just gifts that the Quakers gave. It was all of this real moral and encouragement that really helped the young people that went out to the colleges.
I was in Hart Mountain, Wyoming. My wife was in Jerome, I guess it was. But regarding the gift you got, I got a gift in Hart Mountain. And my mother told me, it was a handkerchief, but my mother told me I must write a thank you letter. So I did it for both of us in a way.
There was someone else here that wanted to share.
My name is Hitoshi Samishima. I'm a product of the Pasadena Unified School District. I graduated from Pasadena Junior College before the war and was a junior at USC when the war broke out. And I was in Gila when the military intelligence service came around to recruit fellows to attend the military intelligence school. But I took the exam, but then I, in the meantime, received an acceptance from the University of Denver in Colorado through the efforts of the Quaker organization. And so rather than go to the Army, I chose to go to Denver to go to college. Now, I have ever since that just by the American Friends have been donating to them every year, and as a means of thanking them. Now, Esther mentioned that she was afforded help from Mr. Carr, Bill Carr. Bill Carr's son was my classmate at Pasadena Junior College. And we went through junior high school and junior college together. And I met him after I came back from the wars. And he had become an aviator in the U.S. Air Corps. And I just had a close relationship with him. And I just wanted to thank the Quaker organization for that help. One other thing, Esther, your husband, Shig, who was a realtor in Pasadena, was the one that sold me my house.
Okay. I think what we want to do is, I think just by the evidence of so many people here and the fact that people brought things that the Quakers had given them, it shows how much appreciation, how much it meant to people. So I think this whole program has been an expression of thanks, but we have some very, people that came from far away and other places that to share their experiences. So if there's some questions, we'd like to take some too.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap up. Let's all thank all the people who participated, for Joe Franko, Jean Hibino, Esther Nishio, Professor Lane Hirabayashi, Anthony Marsh, and thank you all for coming, because some of the stories we just heard are in fact some of the most precious things I have heard. And I can imagine for so many of the people here who were just young children, to even get that one gift in camp, that lasts a lifetime. But you should have written that. Thank you. Oh my God. What would your mother say? We are going to have a reception outside, so there's an opportunity for all of us to talk. I just wanted to bring your attention to one thing. On June 19th at the David Henry Wong Theater, which is over in the Old Union Church, NCRR and the Asian American Vietnam Veterans Organization is doing a screening called Lieutenant Watada by Frida Lee Mock. So that'll be 7 o'clock on June 19th. All of you, thank you for coming. Thank you for everybody for doing this. Hope to see you all soon. And let's all go enjoy the reception outside.